What am I doing? Am I dying? Let me get back quick, something. So I went through the air like this, swimming through the air to get back to the body. Pang, got back in the body.
L'esercito degli Stati Uniti è da sempre alla ricerca di nuovi modi per studiare e spiare i nemici e gli alleati. Tuttavia, nel 1983, il Tenente Colonnello Wayne McDonnell presentò un rapporto molto insolito e dettagliato all'intelligence. Il rapporto si chiamava Analisi e valutazione del metodo Gateway, che era un metodo passo passo su come ottenere un'esperienza extracorporea. Ma il rapporto di McDonnell andava ben oltre. Chi pratica il metodo Gateway non proietta solo la propria coscienza in un altro luogo, ma può proiettare completamente la propria coscienza fuori da questa realtà, in altre dimensioni, viaggiando ovunque nell'universo e in qualsiasi tempo. Il rapporto spiega che il nostro universo in realtà non esiste, è una costruzione creata dalla nostra mente. Utilizzando il metodo Gateway si può uscire dal costrutto e vedere la realtà per ciò che è realmente. Il rapporto di 30 pagine è stato immediatamente classificato per un semplice motivo. Chiunque può imparare a farlo, anche tu. McDonnell nel documento arriva subito al punto. Esistono stati di realtà alternative e altre dimensioni che esistono al di fuori del nostro mondo fisico e al di fuori dello spazio-tempo. Secondo il rapporto possiamo utilizzare il metodo Gateway per accedere ad altre dimensioni, che in pratica sono quelle di cui abbiamo parlato negli episodi precedenti. Il rapporto utilizza la meccanica quantistica per descrivere la natura della coscienza, ma soprattutto il rapporto fornisce istruzioni passo passo su come avere un'esperienza. Seguendo queste istruzioni si può imparare a proiettare la propria coscienza e visitare altre dimensioni. Il metodo Gateway è un sistema di addestramento sviluppato negli anni 70 dall'Istituto Monroe in Virginia. Il colonnello McDonnell, insieme ad altri membri del personale militare, ha seguito il processo di addestramento di una settimana, che chiunque può fare anche oggi. Ma il rapporto Gateway si concludeva con un avvertimento finale che nessuno si aspettava davvero. McDonnell avvertiva che l'esercito doveva essere preparato per incontri con entità intelligenti e non amichevoli che potrebbero esistere al di fuori dei confini del tempo e dello spazio. In altre parole, una guerra paranormale. Anche se chiunque può imparare il metodo Gateway, non basta semplicemente schioccare le dita e scappare dalla realtà. Bisogna prima imparare tecniche di rilassamento, meditazione e concentrazione estrema. La materia solida nel senso stretto del termine semplicemente non esiste. Piuttosto la struttura atomica è composta da griglie di energia, che vibrano circondate da altre griglie di energia, che orbitano a velocità straordinariamente elevate. Non c'è materia solida. Tutto ciò che esiste è una forma di energia che vibra a frequenze estremamente elevate, dagli oggetti più grandi nell'universo agli atomi e alle particelle subatomiche. Tutto è energia. Il punto da fare è che l'intero essere umano è come l'universo che lo circonda, niente di più, niente di meno di un sistema straordinariamente complesso di campi energetici. I cosiddetti stati della materia sono in realtà variazioni di energia. Il nostro cervello è sintonizzato sulle frequenze di energia che compongono il mondo che vediamo, ma percepiamo solo una piccola percentuale dell'energia che esiste effettivamente intorno a noi. Pensate di sintonizzare una radio. Se la sintonizzate su una stazione rock, ascoltate solo la musica trasmessa su quel canale. Naturalmente ci sono molte stazioni con tutti i tipi di musica diversi, ma la vostra radio non le riceve tutte in una volta, riceve solo una singola stazione a cui è sintonizzata. I nostri cervelli sono proprio come quella radio, progettati per filtrare tutto tranne l'energia che crea la nostra realtà. E proprio come una radio converte l'energia in suono, i nostri cervelli convertono questa energia universale in cose che possiamo vedere, ascoltare, gustare e toccare. Ma nessuna della materia solida intorno a noi è veramente lì. I nostri sensi creano l'illusione della materia affinché possiamo vivere questa realtà in un modo che possiamo comprendere. Secondo il rapporto Gateway e secondo David Grush e altri scienziati, viviamo tutti in un ologramma universale condiviso. L'universo è composto da campi energetici interagenti e in sé per sé un gigantesco ologramma di complessità incredibile. Secondo le teorie di Carl Pribram, un neuroscienziato della Stanford University, e David Bohm, un fisico dell'Università di Londra, di cui abbiamo 2 brevi articoli sul blog, insieme al documento completo del metodo Gateway, anche il cervello umano si sintonizza con l'ologramma universale e raggiunge lo stato che chiamiamo coscienza. Anche se chiunque può imparare il metodo Gateway, non basta semplicemente schioccare le dita e scappare dalla realtà. È necessario del tempo per imparare bene le tecniche di rilassamento, meditazione e concentrazione. Il metodo Gateway insegna a disattivare il filtro nel cervello per dare accesso a stati alternativi della realtà e ti consente di sfuggire completamente allo spazio-tempo. Chiunque può imparare a fare questo, non hai bisogno di passare anni in un monastero buddista, non hai bisogno di uno sciamano o di un guru o di droghe che alterano la mente, hai solo bisogno di cuffie. Il metodo Gateway è infatti una meditazione guidata. Negli anni 50 Robert Monroe trovò prove che diversi tipi di suono potevano influenzare la mente umana in diversi modi. Alcuni schemi sonori rendono assonnati, altri ci rendono vigili, altri suoni possono trasmettere ansia, altri sono molto rilassanti. Utilizzando questa scoperta, Monroe iniziò a sperimentare. Una notte, mentre provava una tecnica di apprendimento durante il sonno, Monroe ebbe un'esperienza che non si aspettava, ma che avrebbe cambiato la sua vita. Mentre ascoltava una specifica frequenza sonora, il suo corpo lentamente si paralizzò. Poi iniziò a sentire una vibrazione che diventava sempre più forte. Improvvisamente fu immerso in una luce bianca brillante, poi un suono che divenne un ruggito così forte che era insopportabile. Poi in un istante fu tutto silenzioso. La vibrazione si fermò, la luce svanì e Bob Monroe si trovò nella sua camera da letto, fluttuando sopra il suo corpo addormentato. Non c'era un nome per questo all'epoca, più tardi divenne nota come OBE, Out of Body Experience. Esperienza extracorporea, un termine che Monroe stesso rese popolare. Sebbene questa OBE fosse avvenuta completamente per caso, fu in grado di utilizzare il suono per replicare l'esperienza 9 volte nelle successive 6 settimane. Monroe scrisse l'esperienza nel suo libro del 1971, Viaggi fuori dal corpo. Bob Monroe scoprì che mentre era fuori dal suo corpo poteva identificare, accedere e sostenere diversi stati di coscienza. Questo viene fatto sincronizzando gli emisferi sinistro e destro del cervello. Anche se il cervello funziona come un tutt'uno, le sue diverse parti servono funzioni diverse, così come i suoi 2 emisferi. L'emisfero sinistro è tradizionalmente associato alla logica e alla ragione, alla percezione e alla concentrazione. L'emisfero destro è responsabile delle emozioni, della creatività e dell'intuizione. L'emisfero sinistro del cervello tende ad essere più attivo nella gamma di frequenze beta, da 13 a 30 Hz. Che è associata alla vigilanza, all'attenzione e al controllo cognitivo. L'emisfero destro è attivo nella gamma di frequenze alfa da 8 a 13 Hz, che è associata al rilassamento, alla creatività e all'elaborazione spaziale. Il cervello destro opera più lentamente del sinistro. Ascoltando certi suoni, il metodo Gateway sincronizza entrambi gli emisferi utilizzando una tecnica chiamata Hemi-Sync. In pratica il metodo Gateway è un sistema di addestramento progettato per portare una maggiore forza, concentrazione e coerenza all'ampiezza e alla frequenza dell'output delle onde cerebrali tra gli emisferi sinistro e destro. Secondo il metodo Gateway, quando la frequenza e l'ampiezza del cervello umano sono sincronizzate, è possibile accelerare e aumentare i livelli di vibrazione della mente. Mentre la mente risuona sempre più in alto, può sincronizzarsi con i livelli energetici più complessi dell'universo. A questi livelli la mente è in grado di elaborare informazioni allo stesso modo in cui elabora l'energia della nostra attuale realtà. In altre parole, si possono vedere, sentire e comprendere questi altri stati di realtà con la stessa facilità con cui comprendiamo la nostra realtà. Ma non solo, possiamo imparare a cambiarla, controllarla e piegarla alla nostra volontà. Il metodo Gateway rilassa il cervello attraverso onde sonore elaborate e create dal Monroe Institute, che hanno una frequenza diversa di 4 Hz tra orecchio destro e orecchio sinistro. Quando il cervello è abbastanza rilassato, l'ampiezza e la frequenza delle onde cerebrali possono essere spinte sempre più in alto e lo spazio tra le 2 onde cerebrali diventa sempre più piccolo. Quando la distanza tra le onde cerebrali scende al di sotto della distanza di Planck, si esce dallo spazio-tempo. Guardando il disegno di McDonnell, vediamo rappresentata la nostra onda di energia cerebrale. Il centro dell'onda, dove trascorriamo la maggior parte del tempo, rappresenta la nostra realtà. Nella parte superiore e inferiore dell'onda, appena prima che questa cambi direzione, c'è un breve momento in cui non si muove, si arresta prima di scendere. Si ferma brevemente, poi risale di nuovo, è in questi punti di cambiamento di direzione che l'onda esce dalla nostra realtà. E secondo il rapporto Gateway si unisce all'infinito e all'assoluto. L'energia in questo stato di inattività infinita è definita all'assoluto. Tra l'assoluto e l'universo materiale in cui viviamo, la nostra esistenza fisica, ci sono varie dimensioni intermedie a cui la coscienza umana può accedere in stati alterati. Perché l'assoluto è energia cosciente e infinita, che occupa ogni dimensione, incluso lo spazio-tempo in cui viviamo. Non possiamo percepirlo direttamente. Pensate a questo. Lo strato superiore rappresenta la nostra realtà. Tutto ciò che possiamo vedere e toccare. Questo strato si trova sopra altre dimensioni, qualunque esse siano, e tutte queste dimensioni, insieme a tutto il resto, si trovano sopra ciò che McDonnell chiama l'assoluto. L'assoluto è ovunque, ma non possiamo vederlo. Tuttavia, tutto accade dentro di esso, quindi l'assoluto ha creato il nostro mondo. Ma chi ha creato l'assoluto? Noi. L'assoluto è un campo di energia che sta lì senza fare nulla, ma su questo campo di energia è stratificato il campo di energia che costituisce la nostra realtà, e tra questi ci sono altre dimensioni. Ma l'assoluto siamo noi che l'abbiamo creato, non uno di noi, ma tutti noi, ed è per questo motivo che Elizondo ripete sempre: siamo tutti collegati. Siamo nati in questa realtà, con la nostra coscienza individuale, viviamo il nostro tempo qui sulla Terra e poi la nostra coscienza ritorna all'assoluto da cui proviene. Secondo il rapporto Gateway torniamo a questa coscienza collettiva, ma manteniamo anche la nostra identità individuale, quindi in un certo senso l'immortalità. Il colonnello McDonnell vede l'assoluto come ciò che molti potrebbero considerare Dio, il concetto di forza creatrice invisibile. Il colonnello poi descrive la natura stessa dell'assoluto, come ha raggiunto l'autoconsapevolezza, cioè proiettando un ologramma di se stesso per poi percepirlo. L'assoluto è l'agente effettivo di tutta la creazione, di tutta la realtà. McDonnell sostiene che il metodo Gateway è uno strumento prezioso, se non il più prezioso mai progettato, per aiutare una persona a comprendere veramente se stessa e la natura dell'universo. Racconta che i mistici antichi sembravano comprendere intuitivamente la verità sull'universo, e il metodo Gateway lo conferma. Tutti sulla Terra fanno parte di una coscienza collettiva, tutti qui per lo stesso scopo: accumulare esperienze, imparare gli uni dagli altri e in ultima analisi riportare quella consapevolezza all'energia da cui tutti proveniamo. Sentiamo direttamente Bob Monroe.
But simply put, at that time I began to experience moving out of my body. And that was the final thing of something that had begun a year at least or more before that time. I began to have, quote, dreams about, and I was an airplane pilot, so you can understand how that would take place. I began to have dreams about taxiing to the runway on an airport and getting the plane off the ground, and once I got it off the ground, that I would look up and here are all these wires. It was as if one were flying down a street, and there were all these power lines overhead and telephone lines, and you couldn't find a hole to get out of it. And that dream had gone on, a recurring dream, for at least a year. And then, shortly before this big thing took place in '58, I also began to experience a funny kind of vibration. And I went to it was as if my body were shaking, but there was no feeling of shaking. It was just internal. And I went hurrying to my favorite doctor, and he examined me and says, "Oh, you are working too hard. You are stress-filled, but there's nothing wrong with you. Go take a pill and relax or something." Well, not necessarily being a pill taker, that did not work too well. But in any event, after many times, like 25 or 30 more times of experiencing this vibration, I thought, well, and fighting to get out of it is the point. I just pull myself away from this vibration. The next step was, well, this will never get anywhere. I'm too frightened about it. If it's going to kill me, let it kill me. So, with that in mind, one particular afternoon when I was lying down, I said, all right, fine. The vibration came. If it's going to kill me, let it kill me. So I waited and waited and waited. And after a while, after about 5 minutes, it faded away, and I was still alive. So I thought, now I know it won't kill me. So I'm on safe ground. So after that, I began to simply let it happen and wait that 5 minutes so I could do something. And on this one famous night, as we're in 1958, I was lying in bed on a Friday night, waiting for this vibration to end so I could go to sleep. And as I was lying there, thinking about what I was going to do the next day, while this vibration got through doing what it was supposed to do, I was thinking how nice Saturday morning was going to be, because we had had what we call a cold front come through, and there would be strong northwest winds, and there would be great thermal action. So, being much into sailplanes and gliders at that time, the soaring was going to be tremendous. And as a result, this was my sense of great joy and anticipation as I was waiting for this vibration to end. And as I waited and waited and thought how nice this is going to be, suddenly I felt something bumping against my shoulder. And that, of course, is part of the history, when I discovered that what I was bumping against was the ceiling of my bedroom. And that bumping turned around, and I did not know where I was till I saw this funny sort of a fountain coming out of what I thought was the floor. And I thought, where am I? This is a funny kind of dream. And I looked more closely, and I thought, there's something terribly wrong. This is not a fountain, this is the chandelier, the light fixture coming out of the ceiling. So I looked around, and sure enough, down there in the bed below me was my wife lying in bed, and beside her was a man in bed. And I says, what kind of dream is this? This is a strange dream. Whom would I think of who would be in bed with my wife? And I said, I can't resist finding out. So I moved a little closer, and then this great shock came over me, because the person in bed with my wife was me. And then the fright came, the terror. What am I doing? Am I dying? Let me get back, quick, something. So I went through the air like this, swimming through the air to get back to the body, and pang, got back in the body. That was the first time that I, in turn, found out. And then very quickly I sat up, and everything was quiet. My heart was racing because I was excited, but everything else was fine. My wife's asleep, quiet, nothing, no problem. So that is exactly how it began, all the way back in 1958. It took many visits to a doctor to find out that I did not have a brain tumor. It took reassurances from a very well-known psychiatrist friend who said, I can certify that you're sane, Bob. I said, well, what's the matter with me? And what's this thing that's happening to me? And he said, well, I think that you are doing what is known as conscious dreaming. And I looked at him and I said, what's conscious dreaming? He says, I don't know, I just made it up. Bear in mind that it took a full year after this first took place for me to finally come to the conclusion that this was real, that it was not a dream, that it was not an hallucination, that it actually took place. Because my left brain, my intellect, my analytical part of me had to be knowing this, not believing it. And it took not a great adventure or a great something that took place. It was an accumulation of one verification after another, again and again and again. And after a while I said, myself, my brain, my left brain, my total self had to say, yes, this is real. There's too much evidence. Never mind the world, but for me. Mm-hmm. And that's how it began.
Bob, after you began this this investigation into your own experiences out of your own need to understand what was happening, out of that came Hemi-Sync. Could you tell us how the information about the influence of these sound patterns with the kind of experience that you were researching, how did that connection get made for you?
But as in terms of the Hemi-Sync process itself, the Hemi-Sync process didn't really take place until the 70s, and by that time we had moved over to Charlottesville, Virginia, and gotten into cable television. And that was the new thing to do as against radio stations. And we had, through an association with by that time I'd accumulated about 8 or 9 different engineers and scientists and doctors in Virginia. And we, as a group, it was nothing, again, mystical or magical, we decided that would be the good way to do it, to create a binaural beat. And that's how Hemi-Sync was born. Mm-hmm. And that is, you know how it works, I'm sure. That's by setting one kind of signal, say a 100 hertz signal in this ear, and then 104 hertz over here. And the differential, that 4 hertz, is synthesized by the mind, the brain. You can't hear it, it's too low in frequency to hear. But it is very effective to get that 4 hertz, which is a brainwave frequency, into the human mind.
Bob, what is the usefulness of Hemi-Sync in exploring different states of consciousness?
In exploring different states of consciousness, Hemi-Sync, first of all, is tremendously valuable for one reason, and that is that it's not like a drug, it's not like a chemical. It is a sound, and as a sound, it in turn doesn't invade the body, as it were. It's not even like electrical stimulation, where you force the body to do things by electricity. What it also means is that the mind can accept it or reject it. In other words, it's not something that forces itself into you like this. It says here, and it is. So the applications are so broad that we really don't know all of them. We uncover new ones all the time. Let's take the extremes. You can use Hemi-Sync to keep you awake, totally focused attention, wide awake and alert. And over here, you can put a person to sleep, into natural sleep. And in between are all of these many, many different ways, different states of consciousness that Hemi-Sync can be used to perform things. And let's go to the wake stage first of all. You can be super awake. Now, what do we mean by, say, super awake? Intense focus of attention, concentration, so that all of your attention is focused on, say, a book or something like this. And by that focusing, you achieve much greater retention and much greater understanding just as you do focus your attention. But this helps you do it to a degree perhaps that you've never been able to do before, that type of focusing of attention. And that is that you don't need all that physical sensory input of your 5 senses to be awake, to be able to think, to be conscious. So you can see the scope of I'm speaking. It's anything that the mind can do. Hemi-Sync lets you help you do that by changing the focus of attention, the focus of consciousness. Mm-hmm. So then that's all the way up to what we call sleep. Obviously, the always important question is, well, what about this thing you were into called out-of-body state? Well, we know where that is too. That's beyond what we normally call sleep. It's beyond that. So you see, one of the things that begins to emerge here is through the use of these sound patterns, we can help, not force, the mind to get into these other ways of thinking, if you put it that way, these other ways of perceiving. And as I'm prone to say, that the whole concept that I found in out of body is past this wall we call sleep, because we think of sleep as unconsciousness, and we have all these other forms of being unconscious, and sleep is the most common of those unconscious states. So what we're doing, utilizing this Hemi-Sync, is to let the individual have for the first time control over his consciousness. Consciousness is a continuum. It does not stop when we lose consciousness here. If we are not conscious here, we are conscious there, whatever there is. I don't pretend to say what that definition of there is. Now, if you don't look away from the TV or something and are thinking about what you will do tomorrow morning when you get up, you are a little bit out of phase because you're not concerned with this here now. You are thinking and doing nothing but thinking. And when you do that, then you're a little bit out of phase with time-space. So you can get the patterns of phase relationships. You're still here, and your consciousness is not only here in your physical self, but you're a little bit out of phase. And as you do this a little bit more, you get beyond inattention, you have what we call daydreams. So you are focused very much in your mind here, but your body's here, and you know your body's here, and you know you're still in time-space. And so there is a phase relationship. Say 60% of you is still in your physical consciousness, and 40% is over here daydreaming somewhere. And if you move it a little bit more, you get into such things as out of control phasing that are caused by alcohol, for example, and you're drunk, or drugs and you're all on some drug high. And it's all uncontrolled, though. It's tremendously uncontrolled. And you can't start it, stop it, but you're out of control, but you're out of phase. So you are perceiving two things at once, the out of control stuff here, and you have physical matter. And I can probably say, take a piece of paper and say, this, for example, is a phase relationship, and that's totally focused. Can you see it on the camera there? That's pretty good, isn't it? Don't have to focus it tight, but just get the angle. Now, as I turn this is moving slightly out of phase. So you have difficulty seeing the print more and more until this way it's very narrow. You could not even define what that is. It's just a line there. And if you're trying to read this, you're having great difficulty because you can't even see it at all now. Now you're seeing another type of something. You're seeing not this, but something else. So you're completely out of phase with time-space. So it's that type of thing. These are ratios, and everything is ratio in terms of consciousness. The interesting part, of course, is that we have certain fascinating things. And that is that when there comes a point we all face, there are certain things like death and taxes we always have to face. Well, one of them we have is facing physical death. And that means that this tuning device that we have called a physical body doesn't work anymore. So we have to phase out of it. And we're completely out of phase, and this doesn't work, so we are totally there again. Our consciousness is not dependent upon this. It's over there. And being over there is, again, a reality. And this is the thing that you begin to understand the more you get into this, that there is other realities which this mind that we have, this human state, can be conscious over in these other areas. And you can learn and do this long before you're forced to drop this physical body and go on. You can go play there.
What is the
Yes.
significance, Bob, of this ability that you've proven that we have to contact these other realities or other phases?
I think the most important thing, first of all, is to understand these ratios, so that we can begin to, just like we do with all of our physical sciences, classify plants, biological sciences, begin to classify these other states of consciousness as to what they really are and explore them. Why do that? The first and foremost thing certainly comes out that we around here have long gotten to the stage that we know we are more than our physical body. What does that mean? That means that it doesn't make any difference what you do here, whatever you do. And this is contrary to a lot of belief systems, no doubt about that. But whatever you do, your performance, your behavior here, doesn't mean whether you're going to exist or non-exist after you die physically. You can be the a wonderful saint or you can be the cruelest person you can think of, but you're still going to survive physical death. That's an automatic thing. And this process lets you begin to know that, not believe it, but know it. And there's a great difference between believing and knowing, a huge difference. You can listen to me and say, I believe you, but if I give you the tools so that you can find this out and say, oh yes, now I know it, think of the wonderful freedom that it would give you to know that you survived death. Not believe it, but know it.
Bob, given what you've been saying, what is the purpose of our playing here? What are we here for?
Well, that's absurdly easy. And that is that you came here to learn. Now, what did you come to learn? These are nice, neat questions. What did you come to learn? You came to learn a measurement system. This is a system of opposites, of polarities. And we quickly give them labels like positive and negative, good, bad, these kinds of things. We learn this measurement system, very important. We learn it, the system of measurement. And a great system of measurement that we learn is pain, pleasure. And we know, how in the world could you know pleasure if you didn't know pain? The most boring thing that you could do is have a very even life with no pain or no pleasure. You couldn't stand it. You've got to have these, and we search for those pain and pleasure things. We go out of our way to do it. Second is very interesting, is that you learn to manipulate energy. I move my arms like this, my hands, I move my eyes and so on. I'm manipulating energy to do that. That's a use of 5 or 6 types of energy that let me move my arm. And we learn these very automatically. And I can tell you from deep personal experience that that simple ability that we take so much for granted of learning to manipulate energy is incredibly valuable in other energy systems. You'd be amazed how much value that we think are ordinary things. Keeping your balance, for example. We automatically learn how to stay balanced in this gravitic pattern. But over there, it's wonderful. But the most important thing of all, we came and we come here to learn and acquire an intellect. It's strange. An intellect. We acquire, intelligence is not enough of the word, an intellect, an analytical ability. We come here to learn that. We use the metaphor left brain. We learn to acquire a left brain by living here and being here. That's the real valuable tool that we come and pick up. So you think that combination puts together a being that is a super being, and that's true, except a terrible thing happens, as they say, on the way to the store. We think we come and learn this, and we think we will go and take off and go back where we came from. Instead of just flying around in the out-of-body state, after I knew it wouldn't kill me, I got curious. And the intellect got curious. What's going on here? What is this that's taking place? That was the difference. That brought the whole thing into focus, into patterns, getting my analytical ability at work in it. And what little growth is due to that. Now, the funny thing is, so now we gather all these things. We gather our intellect, our measurement knowledge, our application of energy, and we're all, as I like to put it, going home with all this bag full of goodies, as it were, to take home and show the local boys how much you've learned and what you can do. The only problem is that when we do this, we forget something that happens, as again on the way to the store, that we don't expect. What's that? Well, if you know about it, then you can have fun. It's where you don't know about it is where it gets dangerous. And that is that we become addicted to being human. And so after we exit this particular life sojourn, we're saying instead of going home and what I call having escape velocity to go home, something's happened in living that life. We've picked up a load factor. There was friction along the way, and that represents it. So instead of moving out and having escape velocity, we start turning along that, and it's our decision, no one else's. That's the important thing, our decision. We say, well, I think I'll go back just once more. And this next time, I think I'll be a male instead of a female. That ought to be more fun. Just once more, and then I'll go home. So what happens is, instead of moving this way, we loop around and go back being a human again, and go back and have another human experience, another lifetime. And we come out again, and we're already this time. But this time we've had even a greater load factor, don't you see? We've slowed up a little more. We haven't got the speed that we did. We have a greater load, and so we're now in orbit, and we have a decaying orbit, because when we come up around the orbit like this, instead of going on, we say, oh, I got to go back, because I've never seen Paris, and I'd like to go to Paris for once in my life, and I'd like to just go there. So whole purpose to go back and live again so that I can go to Paris. And I've heard so much about Paris, I want to go to Paris. So I'll go and live again so I can go to Paris. And as you can see, each time you pick up in each succeeding lifetime a greater load factor, so that as you go through this, your orbit decays more and more as you go through this, living these successive lives, until you get locked in tighter and tighter and tighter, till you are locked in being human so tight that you forget where you came from. You've lost all of the desire to even depart and go home. You've lost it all, because this is so overwhelmingly addictive that you can't think of anything else but this time, space, physical matter, all the things that take place in there. And no matter how hard you try, you can't get away from it. The reason being, there's no law, but when you, quote, die, and instead of going home, you make the decision. There's no law that says you have to stay here. You are the one who says, I gotta go back. I didn't eat enough steaks. I didn't have enough strawberries. I didn't have enough children. All these kinds of things. Or I didn't have enough sex. Anyway, that's how we lock in as being human. Obviously, through the years, I've developed a lot of non-human friends and had some wonderful conversations and meetings with them. I can give you an illustration, and you can see what I mean. This one non-human friend, we got into the discussion of goals, and he said, I said, it's not true. Yeah, I don't know whether it's a he or a she, so I developed a term, he-she. So he-she said, well, perhaps our goals are different. And I in turn said, well, I wouldn't think so. And he says, well, he-she says, well, what is your goal? And I, thinking to be very noble and very spiritual, I said, well, my goals are dedicated to serving humankind. That's what I want to do. And she said, yes, that's a very noble goal, but there are other goals. And with that, I tried to find out. He says, well, there are other goals. That was a nice bait, a lure. And that got me curious and say, well, what other goals would there be? I thought that was a very noble goal. And this great enlightenment came to me months later, years, who can tell, that there was another goal, and that goal is the one I was just perceiving, to go home. And I thought, what a wonderful idea it would be to go home. And to be the local boy who made good and goes back to his hometown with all the medals on his chest and his pockets full of gold and all these bags of tricks, and go down the main street of the town, and everybody will say, oh, here he is, our hero's back. All this, typical go home type of thing. And so I had been home twice and had to be dragged back, kicking and screaming, as it were, from going home, because that was not what I was supposed to do. So I knew what home was and symbolized to me, and so I knew the goal was to go home. I knew what home was like, where I came from. And so my great joy was to prepare, to build, to go home. Oh, this is great, wonderful. And as a result, in using this, I suddenly was home. And the story of my getting this home thing was a very, very profound change. Because I went and got home, and here were these that I remembered so beautifully. They were huge, roiling clouds, and clouds had many, many different hues, bright colors, when them shifting like rainbow colors all through them, and you could lie in the clouds and just observe this spectacle of change. And it was not all round rolling. There were cubes and everything else, all sorts of different types of symbol forms we place upon ourselves by our belief systems. We think that's only certain things that we can do, quote, after we leave here and are non-physical. We forget these other very simple patterns, that these are all based on local ideas, local ways of thinking and doing. Or even what we call intelligence is only a very human system of measurement. And here are all these things, and they suddenly, by this process, opened up to me to discover what the graduate human, the being who graduates from this human system of learning, can be. The goals are so spectacular, so far beyond anything that we can even consider, that they are prime targets for anyone who has curiosity, which I do. Prime targets of the scientist to get into something where the real action is. You run out of action in time, space. There's a limit, but there's no limits in this. In this whole spectrum of consciousness that I say, that's what I'm talking about. How far does it go? I don't know how far it goes, but I do know one thing, that one of the routes that you can go, and that was one of my explorations, because I went and explored all this to see these potentials. One is that one route that you can take, and you can see the source of this, and this is a lot of the humankind. We all have a yearning, and we express it in the desire to go home. We express it in our going outward, in affinity, looking for other intelligent life, looking for things out in the universe, all these kinds of things, and go get into a new game with the Maker. And that's only one of, and seems endless options that one can take. You can be a maker yourself if you want. What you learn here are the basic tools of being a maker.
Il gateway process è un metodo che ci sentiamo di consigliare per sviluppare le proprie capacità. Creato circa 40 anni fa, rappresenta la migliore metodologia disponibile per chi non ha accesso agli archivi vaticani o a quelli della CIA, ma non lo consideriamo il metodo definitivo. Queste tecniche sono infatti alla base di quelle utilizzate dallo Stanford Research Institute, SRI, fondato e diretto da Hal Puthoff, al quale abbiamo dedicato l'episodio numero 4. Abbiamo anche realizzato un video su Ingo Swann, uno dei più importanti remote viewer impiegati dalla CIA per 20 anni. Riteniamo che l'SRI utilizzasse metodologie simili ma più efficaci, selezionando anche elementi migliori con queste capacità. La meditazione, da sempre, è una componente fondamentale delle tecniche di antiche culture per il rilassamento e la connessione con il sé interiore e il divino. Questo stato di rilassamento sembra essere la chiave per sbloccare capacità straordinarie. In particolare, raggiungendo uno stato fisico e mentale simile al dormiveglia, in cui il corpo è immobile ma la mente è vigile, permette di vivere esperienze extracorporee, come in un sogno lucido. Per chi è interessato, su internet si trovano i file audio in inglese del Gateway Process. Tuttavia, a Milano, il Monroe Institute offre questi file in italiano e organizza corsi di meditazione. Diverse religioni hanno sviluppato numerosi metodi di meditazione, senza però un consenso unanime su quale sia il più efficace o rapido. Il metodo del Monroe Institute sembra promettere risultati che i grandi meditatori ottengono in 10 anni, in soli 6 mesi. Il Gateway Process è una meditazione guidata che, oltre a sviluppare le proprie potenzialità, insegna anche a difendersi da entità malevole, cosa che il metodo CE5 non fa. Diversamente dal CE5 che si concentra sull'evocazione degli UFO, il Gateway Process si focalizza sullo sviluppo delle potenzialità della mente umana. Questa è la grande differenza. Imparare ad utilizzare le nostre potenzialità e non affidarsi a qualcun altro. Il programma è composto da circa 38 file audio di 30 minuti ciascuno. Il Monroe Institute consiglia di ascoltarne circa 6 al giorno tutti i giorni per una settimana e poi continuare almeno durante i weekend e tutte le sere per almeno 6 mesi. Più si medita, più si migliorano le proprie capacità. Chiaramente richiede un impegno significativo. Daniel Sheehan ha chiarito che alcune tecniche ci sono state tenute nascoste, riservandole a pochi eletti e lasciandoci nell'ignoranza. È plausibile quindi che negli archivi vaticani siano conservate tecniche precise e puntuali per sviluppare le nostre capacità.